Hey everyone, this is Scott from Forgot to Grow Up. Welcome to our latest Rewatch Revisit review, the video series where I rewatch a movie I haven't seen in a while, talk about my thoughts after revisiting it, and then talk about audience and critics, as well as my own review for that movie. So today I'm talking about Terminator 2 Judgment Day from 1991. So I decided to revisit this one because, well, there's a new Terminator out, so why not revisit it? And the first one wasn't available on Netflix in Canada, so I decided to watch the second one. So yeah, in Terminator 2, we see a cyborg identical to the one who failed to kill Sarah Connor, must now protect her teenage son John Connor from a more advanced and powerful cyborg. So yes, T2, probably one of the best sequels out there to me. The Terminator movie. This is the one that came out just before I was born, a couple years before I was born, so this one's always been the Terminator movie in my life. I remember when I was younger, I remember learning that, oh wait, he was a bad guy in the first one. I remember that being a revelation to me when I was younger, because I grew up with the second one. He was always the one who protected John Connor, so this movie's always kind of had a special place in my heart, and so revisiting it was real fun. I hadn't revisited it in a while, actually, because I'd watched it so much when I was younger. It's one of those movies that you're like, oh yeah, no, I remember the whole thing, but then when you actually sit down to rewatch it, you just get all these little things. You remember why a movie's considered a classic to this day. So yeah, that's kind of why I decided to kind of revisit this one. That's partly why I always like revisiting these things, to see why they still hold up, why I love them in my memory. And this one, I felt like after having rewatched and revisited it, I felt it definitely makes sense why it holds up. It is just so good, so much better than all the Terminators we've gotten since it, with the exception maybe of the newest one, which I won't comment on because I don't want to spoil it, but you can check out my review for that if you want to hear my thoughts about it. But that being said, this one, revisiting it, I get why we have this huge franchise, all these different attempts to try and continue off of it, because this second one was just so great. Just revisiting it, the number one thing that stuck out about it was oh, this really holds up. And that's the thing you hear people talking about when it comes to special effects and, these sci-fi or a little bit more or fantasy superhero movies, all these things where you use a lot more not sci-fi, special effects. And so yeah, it's just immediately off the bat watching this one, I was just so impressed with how well it does stand up. Because in my memory, that's one problem when you do revisit things. Sometimes it holds up better in your memory than on screen. Batman and Robin is one of those for me personally, but so this one I thought was so impressive that it does hold up so well. The special effects, they do such a great job using as much practical effect as they can, because this came out at a time when using CGI was still a little bit more expensive, a little more difficult than even trying to do actual physical practical effects. So I really enjoyed that. Right off the bat, we get one of these, not immediately, but one of the first scenes we get when the Terminator is chasing down John Connor, the T-1000, and they're doing this chase on a bike and with this rig. I was just so impressed by watching that, because nowadays you get CGI everything, and they would have just CGI'd this rig to go off of this thing, but instead they actually drove it off. So I was just so impressed by all these different things they used to craft this story, the way they set it up for when you go into this, from the mindset of having only seen the first one, where Schwarzenegger's character was bad in that first one, and so when you rewatch it and you try to have that a little more in set, you do see how well they set that up to be not give any hints as to either way as to that he was good until that that reveal of him turning, both the Terminators turning a corner with John Connor in the middle of him, in between the two of them, and it being Schwarzenegger being the one to say get down. And so I just really liked that. Another part that was just great about revisiting is just seeing all those memorable iconic lines. I'll be back, hasta la vista, all those just come with me if you want to live, just great lines. And so that's just a great part about revisiting these things. But yeah, all the action scenes in this one, like I said, it makes sense why this is a classic, why this is a franchise that has continued to this day, because they stand out. Those are the things that I just finished rewatching it, but they're the one parts that really stick out in my memory. And that's what I think that's part of what we got with a little bit of the problem with some of these sequels, is the kind of collective memory of these movies maybe focuses a little bit more on the action, but it's actually the character and the story beats that actually add to the suspense and the buildup of the action. So which I feel maybe some of the more recent ones maybe didn't do as well as Terminator 2. Yeah, I just definitely really enjoyed this. This is a movie I think you can revisit pretty often without disappointment, just because it's just so well done. There's so very few mistakes I could personally see, because I was watching this one with a little bit more of a critical eye this time, trying to, what's the best way to put this? Not like pick it apart, but just to see how well it does hold up. Where parts that might have been a little bit like, oh, they didn't explain this as well. The one thing I felt, one thing actually at the very end, which is more of a thing they obviously leave as an opener for them to have done a third one, that you do see at the end when Arnold, when he loses his arm at one point at the end, but then they melt him, and nobody even brings up that he's missing an arm when they're going to melt him, and nobody thought to go look for the other arm. So I thought that was just a little bit of a, but also again, that's one of those things where you only notice because you're like so focused on trying to like look at for something wrong, in a sense, these little things to pick apart. So I felt like if I was just watching this and I might have not noticed that they had left that arm inconspicuous, or it's one of those things where they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna leave that just in case, and which they kind of did. I believe that kind of ties into Terminator 3 if I remember correctly. But yes, so on to the review section of my rewatch revisit review. The critics and audience ratings for this one, I just used Rotten Tomatoes for this just to get the basics, and they tend to have a little bit better stuff for older movies like this. Pre-internet movies. So yeah, the critics give it a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes with the average score of 8.5 out of 10. So an 85% is its like not score, but its grade in a sense. And then audiences also gave it a 94% on the tomato meter with an 8.8. So this is one of those movies that audiences and critics can all agree is great, and that's what I really love about some movies, and that's what obviously most classics end up being, is ones that audiences and critics alike can enjoy, and that you're able to play to both sides of it. Not that there are two sides, but sometimes you can have that, particularly nowadays with comic book stuff. You hear about that a lot, but I think that just goes to show you why this movie sticks out as such a classic, and why they keep trying to do it again with all these different sequels of it. But yes, so my personal rating, obviously I'm up there with both the critics and the audiences. I give this 2 thumbs up, 100%. I love this movie. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. I think it's one of the ones that sparked my love of Arnold Schwarzenegger when I was younger. I've always loved Arnold Schwarzenegger as an actor. He's my favorite. His action, his charm, it's just that whenever he has a quip, that makes me die laughing. And yes, they're all terrible, like dad jokes and puns and stuff like that, but that to me is hilarious, and I love it. And so this is Arnold at his best, and I just love this movie. So that's my review for it, my personal thing. The last little bit I'm going to get to before we wrap this up is just my favorite parts from this movie, from Terminator 2 Judgment Day. I already talked about the first chase scene with where the T-1000 is first chasing down John Connor, and Arnold's Terminator's trying to protect him. So I really enjoyed that first scene, just like how practically it was done. You actually see Eddie Furlong on the bike riding through this, I think there's storm drains in Are they in LA? That's one thing. I'm so bad at keeping track of locations in these things. I think it was Los Angeles. But yeah, so I really enjoyed that first one. Another scene I really enjoyed that always sticks out to me in my memory when I think of the Terminator franchise in general is the Sarah Connor escape scene, the "come with me if you want to live," that whole thing, just her, trying to escape, her still being in this mindset that she needs to escape, and then as she's escaping, she runs into the one thing she's most terrified of. It's just so well done, so well crafted. I just love that scene. And then that line, "come with me if you want to live," and she has to, she actually sees with her eyes that he's the one protecting her and her son as opposed to somebody else, and that she gets on board with it pretty quick, which I enjoy. I just really enjoy the way that scene's done, because it makes sense to me. You would, if you saw it right away, if you saw this thing that had terrorized you before in your life, and you turned a corner and saw it, yeah, you wouldn't care what you were doing. You would turn around and run. But then if it was the only thing that could protect you, you would also then go with it. So I just really enjoyed that bit. And then my other favorite thing is the destroying of Cyberdyne. I really enjoyed that scene. The Arnold going through and taking the minigun to all the cop cars, but not causing any casualties. Maybe some injuries to some knees and legs and stuff, but I just really enjoyed that scene overall. Just a really well done kind of built up, but like this both huge action scene but not at the same time, so still like we still get this thing that we get nowadays, which is it's, you know, the fate of the world in a sense, but at the same time it's a smaller scale one because it's the fate of the future and it only involves one building, so it's smaller scale but bigger ramifications, which I really enjoy as a premise for any kind of action film in general. So that is another one of my favorite parts of this, but I love the whole thing. It's hard to pick out just certain little parts. Arnold's my favorite, so I really enjoyed that too. But yes, that's pretty much all my thoughts. My last thing I'll just talk about is my recommendation. Of course I recommend this. Of course I recommend it. If you haven't seen it, you go watch it, and if you have seen it, go rewatch it because it's great. You won't be disappointed. You'll be glad you did it. But yes, that's all my thoughts on my rewatch revisit review of Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Be sure to let me know in the comments below what your thoughts on Terminator 2 are. If you plan on revisiting it anytime soon, I'm always curious to hear that in the comments below. Thanks again for joining me today. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and have a good one.